Representative Brown.
Present.
Representative Campbell.
Here.
Representative Lean. Representative Lucas.
Present.
Representative Riggins. Representative Storer.
Here.
Representative Stivar.
Present.
Representative Wharf. And Chairman Locke. All present, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Storer were here before, but the rest are all new to this committee at least. And I would like to at least just take a quick moment and let each member kind of introduce themselves just real quickly, tell you who they are, where they're from, so everybody in this room kind of knows who they're talking to up here, if that would be okay. JR, would you like to represent? Would you like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. J.R. Riggins, House District 59, west side of Casper. Work in the natural gas processing industry for about 40 years. Thank you.
Hi there, Ann Lucas, House District 43, right here in Cheyenne. I was a banker for many, many years.
Representative Brown, House District 41, the heart of Cheyenne. 30 years as a journeyman electrician and 10 years in the natural gas production and transportation.
Tony Locke, House District 35, southeast corner of Casper. And I'm a computer geek that lives in the basement, but today I'm here.
Representative Stiver, House District 12, South Cheyenne, retired.
Liz Storer, House District 23, Teton County. I work in philanthropy.
Jamie Lean, House District 38, which is the very west edge of Casper and Natrona County rural, a lot of that. And I'm a homeschool mom.
My name's Kevin Campbell. I'm Representative House District 62, which is about a third of Natrona County and about a third of rural Converse County. I have 30 years in the oil and gas industry.
Robert Wharf, you'll hear me referred to a lot as Bob Wharf because that's who I am. I'm Bob. But I'm from House District 49 down in Evanston. Happy to be back. I'm a biologist by background, but I kind of do whatever, whenever I want to do it. So I have fun. I'm happy to be back amongst my friends. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. And I want to thank you all for taking a quick moment and introducing yourselves. And a few things I want to just talk about decorum. Most of you people have heard this more times than you care to think, but I just want to remind everybody, please silence your phones. That you can all get the rules of decorum, I think, from the website. So please do that if you're coming in here and meeting in this room often. We would really appreciate that. Everybody, please remember all questions and comments pass through the chair. And so remember to address the chair and no discussions in between individuals. I won't get into a whole lot more detail than that, but probably most important, a lot of these bills can get very, we can all get pretty excited and very passionate about these bills. Keep it respectful in the room, and please, when people are speaking, no cheering or screaming at the people who are speaking. We're all just giving our opinions today, and we'll try to we'll do a lot of questioning, but we're not looking to do a debate in this room. We're looking to get the questions and expose the data. So I just wanted to go through that fairly quickly and just make sure we're on track there. Let's see. We'll probably, I think at this point, one other thing I would like to ask of everyone as you come up and you speak, please keep your comments fairly concise. We obviously have a lot of work to do over the course of the day. We're literally, although we start a little early in this committee, we're not trying to make this a 2.5-hour meeting. We're trying to keep it to 2 hours and still give ourselves some time if we do have an important issue to overflow. And one other issue that we might, one other direction we might take on some bills, I don't know which bills we'll kind of see as we go. In many cases, there will be an order of, obviously, there will be an order of people speaking. The one order we may switch a little bit are some of the organizations that will probably speak last. We might let the people speak before them. The biggest driver for that is some of these, if we have people who have traveled here for the day, it's often easier for us if we have to have another follow-up meeting to finish this. In some cases, we'll probably let the people speak before the very end, or next to last. We'll let some of you folks that are here fairly permanently speak last. It'll just be a little easier to make sure that the people's voice is heard. So on occasion, some of the bills, we're going to go that route, and I just wanted to let everybody know that. That being said, let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to hear two bills. We're going to hear House Bill 11, Manufacturing Sales and Use Tax Exemption Amendments. And after that, House Bill 169, Homeowner Tax Exemption 2025 and 26. And we're going to start off with House Bill 11. And basically, the table, or we're now on the, House Bill 11 is on the table for consideration. I'd like to invite the department up to present the bill if we could. Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Appreciate you taking the time here this morning and bringing this bill forward for us. Appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And this bill, House Bill 11, as the chairman outlined, is the Manufacturing, Sales, and Use Tax Exemption Amendments. This was actually a committee-sponsored bill. It was sponsored by the Joint Minerals, Business and Economic Development Interim Committee. The Department of Revenue was involved in those interim discussions related to this bill. It really does two things, this bill. Right now, there is an exemption for manufacturing currently in statute. So that is not changing with this bill. On page 2, you will notice that this bill extends the sunset date for this manufacturing exemption. Currently, right now, this exemption is set to sunset in 2027. This bill on page 2, line 6, and then on page 2, line 19, just looks to extend that exemption out another 10 years. The first part on line 6 references the extension of the sunset in our sales tax statutes. And then on page 2, line 19, it extends the sunset of this exemption in our use tax statutes. So that's one key component of this bill, just extending the sunset of an exemption that is currently already in statute. Then, as you will notice, Mr. Chairman, on page 2, line 22, and then flowing over to page 3, section 2, there is a repealer in this bill as it's currently written. One thing to note is this repealer is conforming language from House Bill 197 from last year. And so last year, House Bill 197, it made some updates and clarification to this manufacturing exemption. Due to some oversight, myself included, the use tax statutes were not included in House Bill 197. So this is just conforming language for what was passed for the sales tax side of the manufacturing exemption last year. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that is the bill. The department would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why 10 years? They've already had it for 10 years. I'm still trying to figure this out. This is not my ball game here. Why another 10 years? They've already had it for 10 years. Why do we keep extending and putting sunsets out?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'm not your best resource to answer that question. I hate to punt the answer on that one. It is important to note, though, one thing I can highlight is that our manufacturing exemption is currently our only sales and use tax exemption that does have a sunset. So it's really a better question for the industry, but this is the only exemption we have that does have a sunset clause.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Any other questions from the committee? Just a quick question from me, Mr. Fanning. Do you have a good feel for how much, what the cost, what the revenue bubble of this, or what the cost of this is? Can you give us a feel for that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. One of the notes or the things that happened with House Bill 197 last year was that it actually repealed a recording requirement on these exemptions. One of the reasons that that reporting requirement was repealed for this specific exemption was that we didn't have a good feel. The previous statutes required the Department of Revenue to collaborate with a variety of state agencies to try and figure out just how much the manufacturing exemption cost, I guess is a word I'm going to use. In addition to data centers, at one time there was rolling stock, at one time there was broadband equipment. So we did have this requirement in the past to try and survey and find out this figure. We used to present that to the Joint Revenue Committee in the interims, but it was repealed last year. I do have my report in front of me from November of 2023. And it's important to note, so when we were trying to figure out the cost of these exemptions, we would actually survey the industry. So we would send them a letter during the summer and say, hey, how much did you use of this exemption? We just didn't get good response rates. Not always with the manufacturing industry, but all the other ones I just outlined. So for 2023, we sent out 1,342 manufacturing surveys. And that was companies flagged as manufacturers in our system. From that, we received 520 responses, and that's a response rate of 38%. Out of the 38%, those companies noted $4.3 million in unrealized revenue or tax foregone, however you'd like to categorize that. In previous years, I've seen it as high as 18 million, but generally it was in the $4 to $10 million range per year based on our surveys of responses from less than 50%. So I don't know, that's kind of hard to grasp, but we never had a good feel. And that was one of the reasons why that was approved and voted on by the legislature last night, because we were spending valuable department resources trying to figure out that response and that exemption cost. And I just couldn't get to that figure for the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. That's a conversation I think maybe we just need to have outside of this. But any other questions? Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Fanning, I noticed in the fiscal note that this exemption split between the general fund and the local governments. One of the questions that I had kind of touches on what you just mentioned, but I was wondering, is there any concentration of the manufacturing, or is manufacturing kind of broadly distributed across the state? Just more or less wanting to look at, if this is in fact having an impact to local government if we extend this. So can you kind of tell me of the respondents? I mean, were they centralized, or are we talking pretty broad distribution across the state with manufacturing? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, absolutely. We've got manufacturers located throughout the state of Wyoming. And when we send our surveys, it goes out to all 23 counties and everywhere in between. Manufacturing really is a broad definition. because it's going to include things in the mineral industry, it's going to include things in retail sales to some extent, it's all over. Now, the tax foregone, and I'd love to have the industry input on this as well, is generally centralized in a few specific counties located throughout the state. We've got manufacturers all over, but you've got bigger mineral extraction industries that this does impact. Now, the fiscal note that we have, right now, this tax is not being collected. As I said, it's already an exemption. So yes, the tax is already foregone, and so any sort of fiscal note is just, we've already got the exemption in place as of right now.
Any other questions from the committee? Another question I have, and I don't know if this is even a question you can answer or exactly how it affects this bill, but it's just something to keep in mind. Do you have a good feel for, is manufacturing growing here? Are you seeing a larger number of manufacturers? Does the department have a feel for that at all?
Mr. Chairman, so going back to our November 2023 manufacturing exemption survey, which includes several factors in here, not just including the tax foregone. In our 2023 report, we do have an employment history of this sector. And in 2005, the last year we have on here, there were 12,000 people employed in the manufacturing sector based on our surveys with a variety of state agencies, Department of Workforce Services, the manufacturing sector itself, 12,535. Then in 2022, per the data that we have, it was 11,258. So I think that answers your question as far as employment figures. But I know the industry will also have some insight that maybe employment figures don't paint the true picture.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions? Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your survey back in 2023, if I'm reading this right, like I said, this is not in my wheelhouse, but this is based on survey response in 2023, the purchase between the period of July 1st through July 30th, exempt manufacturing machinery purchased by wine manufacturer equaled $79,880,433.40. Can you explain that to me? That's exemption? Am I getting that they didn't pay taxes on that? That's what, I'm trying to figure this out. I mean.
Mr. Fanning?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. I'd love to walk through this. So that $79 million figure, that was the amount of items that would be subject to tax if this tax was in place. And then you take an average tax rate of, right now it's 5.45% sales tax rate across the state. That's our average. So if you take the 79 million, and for this analysis, it was at 5.36%, that's how you get down to that 4.3 million in tax foregone.
Thank you. Any other question? Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I buy a piece of manufacturing equipment in an adjacent state, it's not taxed, right? No sales tax on that, correct?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fanning.
Representative, okay, the answer is yes, it's not taxed. If you go to another state and purchase another piece of manufacturing equipment and then say you bring it into Wyoming for use, we've got this exemption in place. So there's going to be no tax applied to it. Now, if you are subject to laws in a state that does not exempt manufacturing equipment, then you would be subject to their tax laws because you took possession in that state. Then when you bring it into Wyoming, there is no way for us to refund another state's tax. So hopefully that answers your question.
And a follow-up if I could. So, and also a lot of manufacturing in the oil and gas industry, the product going out is also going out of state, so it's not taxed either.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is an important and very, very important insight. A lot of our manufacturing industry, most of what they sell is out of state, not all. That's an important distinction. but most of it is out of state. So no sales tax is being collected when it leaves our jurisdiction. And then in many cases in this industry, there is no sales tax on the equipment purchases as well. So again, that's kind of a policy decision there, but it is good insight.
If I please, I can add one more little question. So, and another thing that they do a lot of time in the manufacturing is one particular component is manufactured here, for example. So, and then shipped to another state for completion. So none of those products would be taxed either. So it could be an advantage to a manufacturer who was building skids, buying equipment here, and then shipping them back to Texas for finishing. And I just see some disadvantages for revenue, generally speaking. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we certainly see that play out in Wyoming.
So that's accurate, so thank you. Representative Brown?
Is this too on the wind energy equipment and the solar?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, if there was an industry that was manufacturing wind or solar equipment, they would also be able to claim this exemption.
Any other questions of the department? Mr. Fanning? Thank you, Mr. Fanning, appreciate that. So just real quickly, I don't know if there's any, doesn't look like there's anybody other, I don't see any legislators or the top five in the room. Are there any people who want to speak on this? We can, how many kind of individuals, not organizations, want to speak? Are there, can you guys show me by a raise of hands who that might be? Excellent. Let's start there, and then we'll move to some of the other groups that would like to speak as well. That would be great. Thank you, sir. Please step up and one thing I would ask, please, before you start to speak, state your name very kind of slow and clearly. Make sure we get it on the record to make sure we can address you appropriately. But thank you for coming. I really do appreciate that.
That, I guess it's hot. Thank you very much. My name is Rex Lewis. I'm the president of Puma Steel here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. We've been doing business in Cheyenne for over 35 years. I was just enjoying a conversation with Pete Ellaway. We go back a ways, and we introduced ourselves a long time ago and used to do some business together. Happy first, Mr. Chairman, committee, let me thank you for your service to the state. I think that's huge. And thank you very much, and thank you for hearing my comments today. A couple of things I'd cover that questions were asked that maybe I can help with. The sales tax exemption for manufacturing goods is almost nationwide. It's in over 40 states. And so, and we do work all over the nation, but primarily in the Rocky Mountain region. We do some major steel projects, and we do some little bitty steel projects. Some of the major projects, I thank you and the rest of the legislatures. We're on that new student housing in Laramie. I think it's almost $300 million project. The steel for that project, those funds, those taxes, those payrolls remain in the state of Wyoming. I can assure you, if we weren't on the project, there's nobody in this state that could have done that project. Those funds would have been out of state. We're also on the expansion to War Memorial Stadium. We're supplying the steel for that, so thank you very much for funding that as well. We do major projects in the region. If you drive through downtown Denver and you look at some of those great big tall buildings, that steel is fabricated here in Cheyenne. We've gone nationwide, not big nationwide, but one that we're proud of is a little bitty project that we did at Ground Zero after 9/11. So, you know, we'll do anything, but we're proud of that very small project, but a little piece that we help rebuild this nation. As far as what revenue is not or generated via this tax exemption, For my chair, I would say, hopefully it's $1 billion. Because that means you have a very robust economy. There's an awful lot of manufacturing going on in this state, and it would be very healthy for the state. Once again, I'm a steel geek, what do I know? But I've been around a long time. You can see this gray hair up here. And I've seen Asia, and when I was a young man, and it was a very troubled area with millions of people starving to death. And now they are a superpower. And they're a superpower, why? Because they are the manufacturer of the world. They manufacture everything. They manufacture probably this microphone. And that's true of the entire world, and it's also true of our nation. Our industrial revolution and the wealth that created in this nation was based on the back of manufacturing. So having been involved in economic development for the state, I once upon a time served as co-chair of the Wyoming Business Council and served as president of Cheyenne Leads. I'm familiar with economic development. And we have to recruit these companies. And I would say certainly don't put us at a disadvantage. If there's 40 states out there that offer, there's actually 42 states that offer this exemption, don't make Wyoming a rare bird that doesn't provide this exemption. So another question was asked was about why 10 years? Most of our business planning is 5 years out. So you're dealing with heavy machinery, big machinery, CNC equipment, robotic equipment. You're planning 5 years in advance. So, we have to know what our capital expenditures are. And if it makes sense, I'm fond of using ridiculous numbers so that, there's nobody that equates it. But if we're going to spend $1 billion on equipment, we need to know what the payback is. I can spend $1 billion. No, I can't. But I can spend $1 billion if I can get $2 billion back. And so that's part of the planning that goes into an organization when they're buying equipment, when they're expanding their facilities. So I would encourage you to extend this the 10 years. And I assure you it does a lot more good than the lost revenue because the revenue that's generated by manufacturing is spread all over the state in employment taxes and sales taxes for goods. So, let me just use that University of Wyoming illustration. It's $300 million that you funded. I don't know how much of it went out of state. Let me pick a number, 75, 80%. Some of it stayed in this state, and it paid people's payrolls, and it paid people to buy tires and the taxes on the tires and the cars, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit of my view, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I really appreciate that. Any questions for Mr. Lewis from the committee? Representative Stibar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewis, what if we change the sunset date and did 5 years to better understand this? Would that work with what you were saying about you're doing your 5-year plans?
Yeah, that's basically in our 5-year plan. And so that, Mr. Chairman, Representative, the 5-year exemption would work in our plan. I'm not familiar with all the manufacturers, but the bigger you are, obviously, the longer term plan you're dealing with. So I don't know, some of the mines or some of the refineries, they may be looking at a 10-year plan.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Any other questions? Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for being here. Basically, what I am seeing is we're just using this as a long-term strategic planning tool. And at $10 million split up over 23 counties, we're talking pretty minimal revenue. But you're telling me that this is something that if Wyoming was to end this, then you have 42 other states that are participating. So this would detract from attracting new manufacturing into our business. And I agree, the larger manufacturers like the refineries, the mines. I do think that they probably have a 20-year forecast on that. So am I catching what you're throwing, sir?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, absolutely. I think manufacturing jobs, manufacturing plants are attractive throughout the nation, and that's why that 42-state exemption exists, is they're all competing for those jobs and those plants. And so, yes, I think that is part of economic development. We want to give the Business Council and the Cheyenne leads of the state every tool we can to recruit manufacturing. The big manufacturing facilities being built today, and we're talking billions and billions of dollars for chip manufacturing, computer guys that make chips. We don't have any of those facilities. We've done very well in data centers. And man, we're building data centers everywhere around the state, or certainly around this county. But, you know, if you're going to attract a chip manufacturer, Intel or something like that, you need a whole array of tools, and low cost of doing business is part of it.
Any other
Mr. Chair?
questions?
Yeah, and follow up, so this would, in your opinion, put us at a distinct disadvantage by not?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? We'll move. All right. We'll move. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I really appreciate you coming up and bringing us some insight to the industry here locally. And I know there's others who want to speak on this topic. Please feel free to step up, fill the chairs. We'd love to hear from you, and please try not to be too long and deep, but certainly give us information that we need, and we really do appreciate you guys all being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's, battling a cold. My name is Jody Levin. I'm here on behalf of the Trona industry. So this was an interim topic that the Trona Industry and Wyoming Mining Association asked for. I get asked this question often: why was it at minerals and not at revenue? The quick answer is we did ask the co-chairs at the time if they would take this as an interim topic, and we were suggested to go look for another committee because revenue's top priority, of course, was residential property tax relief. So we took this to the Minerals Committee, but it's Minerals Business and Economic Development. And we felt that that was an appropriate committee to really talk about why this exemption is important from an economic development standpoint. So for the Trona industry, especially for our new members who may not be familiar, this is an industry that exists in Sweetwater County. It is both mining and chemical manufacturing. It's not just the Wyoming's Trona industry. This is the US soda ash market. All comes out of Sweetwater County. So it goes through a chemical manufacturing process to make soda ash. Soda ash is the main ingredient in glass. So anytime you see glass, the glass in your car, the glass in your windows, food containers, that all comes from Green River, Wyoming. It's an extraordinary industry. And again, it's the US soda ash market. 90% of the market is all out of Green River, Wyoming. Our main competitor, so 60% of what gets manufactured is shipped overseas, and our main competitor is China. And the Chinese government heavily supports their industry. So this exemption becomes important for stabilization of the industry from a global perspective, because we already supply the US market. It's really the global market. In terms of jobs, this industry employs 2,300 people, has a payroll of $450 million. This exemption is enabling those plants to do expansion projects right now. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, it may give out on me completely. We have one company who already did an expansion project, $380 million, 120 employees. So the economic benefit that accrues back to the state of Wyoming, property tax, increased severance tax, and certainly those high-paying jobs. You may have heard we have two other plants that are doing expansion projects right now. They're in the checkerboard. So they're dealing with sage grouse. They're dealing with the BLM's resource management plan, highly controversial. How long is it going to take these plants to get built? It's a really good question. The 10-year horizon, they have 10-year mining project planning. It could take longer than 10 years to get these projects built. They are enormous. One of them is projected to be a $5 to $6 billion project. It'll have 4,500 construction workers at peak, 530 full-time jobs when it's operational, and an increase of 6 million tons of soda ash. The other one is a $2.6 billion project, 1,300 construction workers at peak, 300 full-time jobs, and another 3 million tons of soda ash. So the benefits coming back to Wyoming, certainly in terms of employment, average salary is $100,000 in the trona and soda ash industry. So these are incredibly well-paying jobs, but also that increase in property tax and then the increase in severance tax. So we would encourage you to extend it for 10 years. We did have a conversation over the interim about making it permanent. As Mr. Fanning indicated, this is one of the few exemptions that has a sunset date on it. We're fine with a sunset date. We're fine with having to come back in routinely and justify to the legislature that this is still a benefit to the state of Wyoming. So we didn't ask for it to be permanent. I'm sure the industry would love for it to be permanent, but we also believe that there's a fiduciary duty on behalf of the industry to come in and explain that it is a good benefit to the state. And for the trona industry, we believe we can tell that story, and we're glad to tell it, but we do ask that it not be shortened under than 10 years because of that planning horizon and because of the difficulty of getting these massive projects built. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Levine. Any questions? Great, thank you so much. Mr. Detai, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My name is Travis Detai. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. And I've had a chance to meet some of the new members. I look forward to meeting the rest. But for, just to give you a little bit of an idea of who we are, the Mining Association is the state's trade association that represents our coal companies, our trona and soda ash producers. Our other industrial mineral is bentonite, and we represent the state's uranium industries. We've got companies that we represent that are developing rare earths, lithium, gold. We also represent about 100 companies that are currently supplying the mines, manufacturing equipment for the mines, and that's a little bit who we are. My colleague, Mrs. Levin, really did a great job of talking about the importance of the exemption to our trona industry, but our other industries use it as well. Unlike our coal industry, where we just basically mine the coal, crush it, put it on a train, send it off to a power plant, our industries, like our uranium industry, we mine the ore and then we process the ore into yellow cake uranium, which is then, we manufacture yellow cake uranium. So this exemption is important to that industry as well. We're on the edge of another significant uranium boom. We have companies coming back online, improving and building new processing facilities to take that ore and get it to the yellow cake stage. So this exemption is important to them. On the bentonite side, I would point out we're the nation's leading in production in all of these minerals. And really important job producers. On our bentonite side, we mine the bentonite clay, and then it is processed inside and it is manufactured into products that support our oil and gas industry, drilling fluid, plug mud. And a very important product that we manufacture right here in Wyoming is pet litter. We're the cat litter capital of the world, and we want to keep it that way. Buy cats if you want to support your Wyoming bentonite industry. But to a point that was discussed earlier, if this exemption goes away and we become one of the only states that does not have it, it's very easy for a bentonite company to mine our ore, because mine in the northern part of the state. You mine it here and then go manufacture your products in Montana. We don't want that to happen because we want those jobs and we want that revenue in Wyoming. Our rare earths projects, we've got a significant, we've been up Rare earths are something that are not really rare. They're used in everything, the minerals there, in your phones, in your cars, in our sophisticated weapon systems. And right now, we're beholden to the Chinese to get those components to build those products. We want to take that, we want to stop that, do it right here in Wyoming. It's a national security issue. And we're in the process of a company doing a manufacturing facility to do those rare earths and, take the ore and process it into rare earths. And we need to do that here in Wyoming. They need this exemption. And again, it's already been said, this is really about Wyoming jobs. And, this state runs on extraction and it runs on manufacturing. We've got equipment manufacturers in Casper and Gillette, major manufacturers for mining equipment. They use this exemption, and we want to keep them here in Wyoming and keep them doing what they do here in Wyoming. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions, but this is an important bill for the Wyoming mining industry. And, we talk about protecting our core industries. This bill fits the bill. No pun intended, I guess, but we would ask for your support on this.
Thank you, Mr. Detail. Any questions? Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. D. and Ms. Levin. I'm curious, just on the Trona side, the number of employees that are involved with the manufacturing versus the number of employees involved in mining, or ballpark, or just generally. I mean, I think, Mr. D, you make a great point that Wyoming is blessed with so many different minerals, and we are a wealthy state because of what we have been able to extract out of the ground, but really producing and manufacturing a product here is really where that value added is, that really makes the state prosper. So I'm just kind of curious what that looks like.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Storr, it's a good question. It's one that I will probably have to get back to the committee on. I don't know the exact split between mining and the manufacturing, but you are correct that the Trona industry is probably the best example that we have in the state of value add, because we take an ore that gets processed into soda ash, but then there's additional production that happens in Sweetwater County where it goes all the way to the packaging side. Not all of the plants do that, but some of the plants do that. For instance, Church and Dwight, Arm & Hammer has a processing facility right next to one of the Trona mines. So those boxes of baking soda that you buy, that comes out of Green River, Wyoming. It's really extraordinary. But to your core question on the split between the manufacturing and the mining, I will find those numbers out and I will get back to the committee.
Any other questions for them? And actually, let's just do this, let's finish with the last two speakers, then we'll do final question. Go ahead, Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good example maybe perhaps might be like Casper's facility for bentonite. So they package and make it for final sale. Would that be an example?
Mr. Chairman, you're exactly right. I mean, they are bringing the ore in from their pits, they're drying it on site, they're putting it into a big bag of cat litter and it goes out, or drilling mud or plug mud, and it goes out to their customers, absolutely. And that happens all across Wyoming.
Representative Stivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have is the report that was done in 2023, the last one that was done, I think it's 2023. Yeah. You only had 38.7% of your manufacturers that responded to the report that revenue requested. If this was an important issue, why wouldn't we have more people sending their information in?
I'm not sure I'm the one to answer that, but I'll take a stab at it. I can't answer it. I don't know who submitted and who didn't. I don't know if my members did or if other manufacturers, because manufacturing is not just mining and manufacturing. It's a broader category, which I think my colleagues will speak to here. I can't answer that. I don't know.
It's just a general question for everybody. Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll go ahead and you are next, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Rennie McKay. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance, and I'm joined by my colleague Chris Mickey. And the Wyoming Business Alliance represents companies and businesses from all over Wyoming, all industries and all sizes. And in particular, just this year, we joined with the Alliance of Wyoming Manufacturers, and that organization came inside the Business Alliance. And so really excited to represent manufacturers more directly, because this is an area that is growing and provides a lot of opportunity. Mr. Fanning talked about the 2023 report, and that's from revenue that came through. If you go to the Department of Workforce Services and look at employment numbers, you can see growth, and actually manufacturing grew the most of all industries between 23 and 24. So since that survey was done in terms of employment, we saw the largest percentage growth there. And right now, I think he said 11,000 employees, and the report that's in your inbox shows 13,000 plus employees in manufacturing right now. So this is a really neat time for manufacturing generally, and some great things are happening. Mr. Lewis is a member of the Business Alliance and the Alliance for Wyoming Manufacturers, provided leadership there. And so in South Cheyenne alone, you have Puma Steel and you have Searing Industries that have really grown and done a lot for this economy. Searing Industries came here in the last 10 years and did that. And some other areas where you're seeing some expansion, you've got Eagle Claw in Cheyenne that's manufacturing the fishing lures. Keltec in the firearms industries is moving to Sweetwater counties. Weatherby moved to Sheridan. Mesa Generator over in Evanston, they do natural gas generators. So again, we're talking about adding value to Wyoming products when you have a company like Mesa move here. These are folks that were recruited and came here and really did look at the tax environment when they came, and they're now creating more jobs. You've also got here Thunder Beast that does firearms. You've got Magpul doing firearms manufacturing in this county. So this is a really neat time for manufacturing. And I can dive in further to all of the further if you've got other questions. But I really do think this is an important piece of legislation because it's about investments. Representative Seifar's question about who didn't report. You may not have reported if you didn't claim it, because this is about investments. It's not, you don't get this every year if you don't make new investments as your company. So if you're not growing, then you may not need this, right? But if we're talking about the Trona industry that is really looking at a steep growth curve ahead, as you look at the firearms industry, it's grown a lot in Wyoming. As you look at the uranium and nuclear space, that's a manufacturing space that's growing right now. So it's we want people to come invest new equipment here, and that means new equipment means more jobs. So that's how I put this all together, and just really hope you'll consider this. We support this very strongly.
Thank you. And did you want to speak, or?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm just here to help answer some questions.
Thank you. And any questions for, go ahead, Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're focusing on big projects, large industry, but I know I'm aware of, there's more than a few manufacturers that do small products with low margins with 3 or 4 employees, like in Casper. And I almost think that's more important with really small margins for their once in a while purchase of a new lathe or something like that. So I assume there's some of that around the state. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke with
Rennie.
folks from Thunder Beast yesterday. Really started small here in Cheyenne and have grown, and that's exactly it, because they've been able to buy more lathes over the last few years.
Any other questions for our speakers? Great. Hey, thank you all for coming. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to be here and bringing some insight to this project. Thank you. This bill. Anybody else want to speak on this bill? Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Excuse me. I spent a 30-year career in the nuclear submarine world, and I'm obviously a supporter of the nuclear future of the plants and mining and so on for Wyoming. I think that these businesses that would get involved in the mining, processing, and later burning of the uranium are going to be laying in long-term plans. And what you do here is part of that. They're going to look out 10 years or more. One of the issues you got is the coal plants we have. Aside from the environmental issues, those coal plants will time out, 50 years, something like that. So the question becomes, will they get replaced or not? And that's part of the long-term planning. So, but at the end of the day, I think Wyoming has a very strong future if they develop it for uranium processing, mining, processing, and then burning. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Any questions? Great, thank you, sir. Anybody else want to speak on House Bill 11? Thank you, Mr. Fanning. I think there might be a question for you if you've got just a moment. Representative Stivar, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fanning, on the repeal, what's that repeal for? That they don't have to report to you anymore, or will you have to report this? Is that the way I'm understanding that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, outstanding awareness on that. So that repealer is not related to any sort of reporting requirement. It's related to language in House Bill 197 that simplified manufacturing and that exemption in Wyoming. So the repealer, and I do have House Bill 197 in front of us, that language right now, there's two kind of qualifications to do this manufacturing or claim this manufacturing exemption. So the first one is they had to be classified as a certain NAICS code in the department's system. And I had testified several times over the years saying, hey, we do our best to have them classified appropriately in our system, but sometimes it's not accurate. And it was an administrative concern on denying exemptions just because the department didn't have them classified correctly in our system. It's all voluntarily reported information to us, but that was a difficult administrative task. So that's part one of that repealer, is in the definition of manufacturing, it allows them to claim it if they're transforming raw products into new materials. So that qualification is the repealer in there. The second part of that repealer is the manufacturing exemption does not include non-capitalized machinery except machinery expensed in accordance with Section 179 of the Internal Revenue Code. This was also a very tough task for the department and the manufacturers themselves to administer. I've worked in the industry, worked with a lot of these companies in my past, and it was very hard for them to administer a Wyoming sales and use tax exemption that was tied to an Internal Revenue Code that is ever changing as well. So that is one. Generally, that repealer is for smaller items that don't have a long time frame. But the current definition that we have in our sales tax statutes clarified that, hey, if you are manufacturing something, you can purchase that equipment without sales or use tax in Wyoming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Appreciate that. Anyone else, any other speakers from the public? Well, then, at this point, we'll close. Did you have a question? Oh, I'll close public comment. And committee, what's your pleasure with this bill?
Move the bill.
Second.
Second, motion by Representative Lean and seconded by Representative Worf. Okay, let's take a look and let's move the bill. Okay, so let's take a quick look, see if there's any amendments. Representative Stivar?
Yes, I want to amend line 6 and line 18 to have the date down, 2023. Not 2023. 2032, and make it 5 years instead of 10 years, so we can come back and look at this with these reports.
It's been moved.
I need a second.
It's been moved to change lines 6 and lines 19, I think, to 2032. Is that right?
32, yeah.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Second that amendment? All right, let's see, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No? The noes, I believe the noes have it. Okay, any other amendments? Okay. Very good. Questions have been called. Please call the roll.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 11, Manufacturing Sales and Use Tax Exemption Amendments. Representative Brown,
No.
Representative Campbell,
Aye.
Representative Lean,
Aye.
Representative Lucas,
Aye.
Representative Riggins. Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Representative Worf,
Aye.
Chairman Locke.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 aye and 1 no.
Very good. Okay, so we'll move on to, get my act together here in a minute. House Bill 169. And we'll get moving on that one. Quick question, just before we start this. How many people from the public want to speak on this one? How many people? I know the organizations are going to speak, and primarily, okay, Mr. Winnie. Okay, I just wanted to get a feel for that. I'm actually going to relinquish the chair to Representative Stivar, and I guess I'll present this bill.
All right, Moaning Jerry. What is your All right, Representative Locke, we're getting into House Bill 169, and go ahead and present your bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 169, homeowner tax exemption 2025 and 2026. So this is nothing new, I think, to everybody. I think most of us that have been put into office this year, all we're pushing for these exact types of homeowner tax exemptions, because basically what's happening is Wyoming's pushing for tax relief. The Wyoming residents are pushing for tax relief for sure. And this is really just short-term tax relief in a bigger picture where we're trying to give it initial tax relief and ultimately look at tax reform to avoid the bubble. And quite honestly, I'll put that in perspective. This is an attempt to fix a fairly unusual bubble and try to give people that relief, because we're talking about people's kitchen tables. But let me move through the bill fairly quickly. This is not, I don't think this will be too much of a surprise or too difficult of a bill to understand for everyone. So I'm going to kind of jump to page 2. And the amount of this exemption would be a 50% exemption of fair market value for our residential homeowners. And this would apply to the first $1 million of the home value. So those are some limits that have been placed on this particular bill. Moving on to, and I'm looking at page 2, lines 8, basically paragraph A there, to give that 50% and that 1 million. Moving on to line 15, paragraph B. Basically, the intent of the bill was that the residential property would be for the structure intended for human habitation only, and it included a house, modular home, mobile home, townhome, or condominium that is a privately owned single-family dwelling. So that's the intent of this bill, is to have those restrictions. Paragraph C down there on line 21, it's a long, painful paragraph, but we'll move over from, it basically describes how the county is going to track the potential loss of the reduction in tax revenues and how they're going to report that. And so if you flip over to page 3, that paragraph goes on. And some important components of this is that the department will then, would then distribute some backfill to the county treasurers through this process in the amount of roughly about 50% of what the reduction in revenue was for the counties. And that is addressed throughout the page 3, and you get down to kind of going to the top of page 4. It again addresses the 50% of reduction in tax revenue that will be reimbursed by the Department of Revenue. And then if you get to line 6 down there, there is there's an appropriation there. We put in there that there will be $100 million of backfill support from the that will be available from the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. And then moving on down through the document, some other sections that are fairly important. You get, I'm going to, a lot of this administrative pieces on page 4 and page 5, getting kind of closer to the bottom of page 5 here. Page 5, Romanet 2, line 17. One of the things, and really it starts on line 13, I wanted to make it clear that this property tax bill is intended, this is short-term relief to the Wyoming taxpayers, because the truth is that we need longer-term property tax reform. So this is just intended to be short-term relief. So it's described specifically, the goal is to do this in 2025 and 26. And then Romanet 2 there, nothing in this act is intended to be construed as substantially the same as any proposed law offering or initiative as provided in 22-24-319. Now, basically, let me explain this. And this includes the People's Initiative. I wanted to be clear, this bill is to be clear that this is not to conflict with the People's Initiatives, as most of you have heard about. It's been certified by the Secretary of State, and we wanted to make sure that this bill did not conflict with that. The objective of this is not to get in the way of that initiative. I want the people's voice. This bill is, to be honest with you, this bill is focused on the people's request for relief, is what it really is. And it's requested by the people because of the impacts to the kitchen table. And so we want to make sure that the people's voice is heard in this bill, as well as their voices heard in these initiatives. Moving on to section 4, and really probably the last of the most important sections of this bill. In section 4, there's an appropriation of another $125 million from the general fund to the department for the purpose of the reimbursement process that we reviewed briefly before. So what we're basically looking at there is there's about $225 million of reimbursement put into this bill to support this initiative, and that's reimbursement back to the counties and municipalities and schools. So that's the bill, and maybe it's good that I hit the fiscal note fairly quickly here. If that's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll move straight to the fiscal note, and then you can ask your questions. On the fiscal note, as I mentioned, there's basically $125 million appropriations from the general fund. And then there is an additional appropriation out of the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account to the department for the 50% reimbursement that is in this bill. This bill is estimated, and I won't go through the numbers in the extreme detail, but we can talk to them. But it's estimated at around $395 million. So at this current estimate, it looks like this should support that 50% backfill with the the $225 million that are in place. But that is kind of a summary of the fiscal note and what this is looking to cost in the form of reduction in revenue that will be spread out between municipalities, counties, schools, and those areas. And so that being said, that is at least a summary. I stand for questions.
Representative Lean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, on page 2, line 10, it talks about residential property, and I'm curious, as the bringer of the bill, could you tell me if that is to include residential properties that are rented out or just the homeowner's primary residence?
Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way this bill was written was to allow us to get money into the hands of the residential property owners, a broader property tax relief bill. So we did not put restrictions on it to primary homeowners, for example, and things like that. Given the Department of Revenue a simpler approach to giving a broader property tax relief is what that was done. So this is intended to hit all residential property right now based on the definition that's in here, which is owned, privately owned single-family dwelling units. And those are defined in here as well in paragraph B, line 15 through 19. So did that answer your question? Thank you.
Questions? Representative Storr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, just as a follow-up to that question, just to confirm that, so this would apply to primary owner-occupied rental units where the landlord would receive the tax break and second homeowners. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Representative Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, as you stated earlier, the whole purpose of this bill is just a temporary fix where this is something for the kitchen table folks. This is not a long-term solution, and that is the reason why it is so vague, I guess, on that, because we're covering everybody right now just to get things moving, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is correct. We were trying to take an approach that got some immediate relief to a broader group of residential homeowners, because at the end of the day, we're addressing a bubble issue that's hit us in the last several years. And the goal was to get relief as quickly as possible to some of those folks, and then ultimately looking for longer-term solutions where we did what I would refer to as property tax reform rather than relief. But yes, this is very much targeted as a short-term solution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative.
Representative Lucas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, am I understanding this correctly then, that this exemption would apply to the home itself and not outbuildings or other improvements or land?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Representative, thank you for that question. That's actually a very good point that I may not have made very clearly. But that is the goal, is to deal with the residential structure itself. The intent of the bill was not to address the land as well. Part of that, of course, is, as you saw, it's a very big fiscal note, and we wanted to get some relief out there, but understanding that we're all functioning within a budget. and the goal not being to, everyone's taking, our budgets are fairly tight. I'm sure everybody's budget's fairly tight. This is an attempt to fix a bubble again, and the land added a fairly large chunk, roughly another 30% chunk on that, which made the fiscal note very difficult to address. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Riggins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, because I'm the appropriations newbie, why did we not just use the general fund for the entire appropriation instead of using some lesser money?
Great question. It was discussed back and forth on what was the best way to go. I took this approach based on an approach that had been used before and after discussions with some others. But it's a great question. It was just an approach that I know we've used in the past and was considered and reused here. So thank you. And this was an approach, and let me just clarify, this was an approach that was used on a bill last year that actually passed the House and Senate with a significant majority, and it was ultimately vetoed. Thank you.
Representative Worf?
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, I appreciate the fact, because one of my concerns is as we go through this process of trying to help provide relief to the citizens, that we don't cause damage to our local governments. And so I applaud the effort that you've done to make sure that we backfill all that. The question I have is, how confident are you that that $225 million is going to be sufficient to cover all of this? I mean, is there a possibility that it could be more than that? That would be the question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Worf. Yes, we have run these numbers. I'm fairly confident. You'll notice that the actual 50% backfill that we would do is actually a little less than the fiscal note. That was somewhat part of the logic in the process to try to make sure we were trying to hopefully undercommit and be able to over-deliver a little bit. Anyway, long and the short is at least try to make sure we covered that, because that was an area of concern that we didn't want to underestimate that. Thank you.
Representative Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Locke. I'm just patting down a couple of fears, because that's one of the concerns that I have, is I want to make sure that this bill is written to where our treasurers and our assessors and our counties throughout can understand it. And that is the reason why I brought up that this is a short-term fix, and we are being very broad in our language. On page 2, in subsection A, 8 through 13, there is a lot of, or as I was in subsection B, line 15 through 19, there's a lot of wiggle room in there. So I'm just absolutely, because we can go into duplexes, all kinds of different situations there. But I wanted to stress that this is a quick fix, and so we're not diving down on particular language right now. We're just throwing a wide blanket for these 2 years.
Representative Locke?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, that's exactly right. The intent is very short-term with this. It was a broad brush. There might have been opportunity to try to narrow it down, but the broad brush came due to our ability to implement this in a timely manner. That's the tricky part. When you start, it's my understanding, and I'm sure the department will clarify some of this for us, but it's my understanding that you start getting into trying to make too much distinction between some of these residential properties. It requires the department to create some additional, have to go out and get some additional data, as well as the assessors, to go out and get some additional data or put a process in place to make sure we collect that. And what it does is it puts a delay on this that we were hoping not to put in place. But again, short-term only. This is at most short-term relief and needs to come and go fairly quickly from that perspective, because the ultimate goal is to get back to what I would refer to as long-term tax reform where we're not seeing the bubble. The objective is to, again, with very much the focus, and you will see in this bill, very much a focus on the people. Again, most of us were put here by the people largely for this reason. But again, this is simply very short-term relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Locke. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that we're not diving down into deep detail on this because this is basically an emergency relief bill. That's the way I look at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Locke.
All right, Representative Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, I would like to know, we have 3 counties in the state that are pretty flush with money. And so I would like to know, is this going to be a uniform backfill or is this going to be proportionate?
The way the bill is currently written, it's somewhat of a uniform distribution, but that certainly can be, that's a point of discussion, I believe, if this bill moves forward.
Representative Storr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, could you please explain to us why you chose the 50% level of quote-unquote backfill? In other words, we're recognizing that the impact of reducing these taxes does impact schools, local schools, counties, special districts. Why only backfill 50%?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Storr. So it's partially due to the fact, due to some of the funds that, the amount of funding appropriations that we were attempting to put into the bill. It was partially limited by that. But that being said, we understand there's impact, and it's a little bit of distribution or a little bit of spreading some of the impact out. But I understand it was largely due to the appropriation or that I had discussed with others and what we thought might be available to us to do in this process. And so that's somewhat what put the cap in place.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in other words, we're just kind of leaving, given most counties are at their maximum mill levy of 12, and I think a lot of special districts are as well, then there doesn't seem to be a mechanism to help provide funding for the services that counties provide as a result of this bill. Do you anticipate that being a problem? And how would you expect local governments to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Storr. Yeah, I do think there's going to be some pushback and some additional conversation on this. I don't know if I have all of the details of how we approach that. I do believe that for all of us at the state and at the county and municipality level, there's going to be some budgeting. We're all going to have to take a look at our budgets and figure out where we look at what do we want versus what do we need. I think there's a big discussion on what's wanted and what's needed. And so, but yes, I do think that's an area we're all going to have to take into consideration.
Representative Lean and then Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, I know that there's currently a percentage of cap that the assessors use. Would the assessors be able to assess a higher value, or does that cap stay in place?
Mr. Chairman, and I've worked with the department a little bit on this, and the current intent, and certainly if the department has wording that we need to put in place, we would like to do that. The intent is to put this, so the cap would stay in place, and then this would be on the capped value, is my understanding of how this is worded. Now, I've worked with the department at some level, but I'm sure they'll come up here and correct me if for some reason I was wrong, but that's the intent of what the bill was to do.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Locke, that is one of the concerns that I do have, is most specifically the county level. I would like to be careful when we craft this that our wording doesn't put any further imposition, that we don't put undue stress on the counties to where they have to use extra resources to try to enforce the fix that we're applying. Does that make sense, sir?
Excuse me, yes. And this is, and that's where we can work the bill and decide where we go. I understand that basically this is a situation where there will be belt tightening, most definitely. There will be impacts. And our hope is that, again, we're gonna have to take a look, even at the state and at the county and municipality level, we're gonna take a look at the wants and the needs. But I understand. That was my attempt. I realized with the 50% was largely based on the dollars that I roughly could come up with and make available. But there's obviously further discussions on the topic you just brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Locke. I have no further questions.
All right, we'll go with Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, I know that you've been talking to the department quite a lot about this, and I guess I'm just wondering how long do we expect it'll take for this relief to actually kick in?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative. The objective of this bill was to support 2025 and 2026. So right away, if this bill were to be passed through. So it would be a fairly immediate relief.
Representative Reagans, and then let's get the questions done. We need to get the department up here to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I just wanted to ask a question about the reimbursement process back to the counties. Will they get their actual appropriate or the reimbursement on a kind of the same time frame as they ordinarily would under the current system? You know what I mean? Understand by that? By the time there's extra paperwork and work to go with that, will they get the money returned to them in a similar fashion, a similar time?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, that is a great question, and actually, I'm going to defer that to the department. I think they can speak to the timelines of this a little bit better than I can. But I'm sure they'll raise those issues, and hopefully they'll be happy to answer that question for you a little bit better than I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. No more questions.
All right, let's move on and bring the department up to go over this bill. And please state your name and your position. And make sure the mic's green.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning, committee. It is an absolute pleasure to meet all of you. My name is Brenda Henson. I serve as the Director of the Department of Revenue. A little bit about myself. In 1988, I got a job in the assessor's office, front desk. In 1995, I was elected county assessor here in Laramie County, and I served in that position until 2013. Big share of my life serving the citizens and talking to property owners. Then I moved to the Department of Revenue as Property Tax Division Administrator until 2020 when I decided to retire. That lasted about 16 months. And our governor asked that I come back and serve in this capacity, and I've been honored to have that responsibility. Taxation is not a pleasant subject. It is one that property owners have passion, and they just want answers, and they just want to be treated fairly. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to this specific bill. Our role at the Department of Revenue is that we provide the computer-assisted mass appraisal system. It's a computer system. The legislature of this great state decided back in the late 1880s that uniform taxation and treatment of properties was so important that the legislature was going to fund one system, provide that to all 23 county assessors, and ensure that if I'm a property owner in Albany County or a property owner in Campbell County, I can get the information that I need in the same format. So that's one responsibility of the department. We also provide the education for elected county assessors and their staff to ensure that they understand their role, what the statutes of Wyoming are specifically, and ensure that they're in compliance with State Board of Equalization standards. So that is key. We provide assessors all the tools that they need to complete their statutory duties within their offices. It's funded through our budget, through the legislature. Specific to House Bill 169, we talk about property tax relief, and I did want to mention that in 2024, there were several property tax relief measures that were considered and several that were passed. And if you have not done so already, in November of 2024, I provided to the Revenue Committee a summary of where the legislation that was passed last year, where we stood with that. And I would encourage you to go back to that report. Keeping in mind that in 2024, we've had it mentioned about the 4% cap. So in 2024, immediately after the legislative session, county assessors across the state were required to calculate from the prior year value of the residential, single-family residential structure. And I wanted to state that the definition in this bill of single-family residential structure is the exact same definition, that's exact language that was in the 4% cap for residential structure. So that 4% cap bill went into place for 2024. And on assessment schedules across the state, property owners saw if that 4% cap was applicable to their residential structure, they saw that reduction in assessed value right on the assessment schedule. Keep in mind, assessors have to have those out no later than the fourth Monday in April. So that was a quick turnaround. Now for 2025, another piece of legislation was the same 4% cap now is being applied to residential land associated with those residential structures. So that will be in place for 2025. Another piece of legislation that this body passed was the long-term homeowners exemption. That will first go in place for 2025. Department of Revenue was required to promulgate rules. We did so. Applications were made available in county assessors' offices in September. I'm pleased to report every county treasurer in the state included a notification within the tax bills last year to notify residential homeowners that if they were 65 years of age and have paid residential property taxes in this state, that they may qualify for the long-term homeowners. And assessors have been accepting applications for that exemption program since September. Right now, we've got about 18,000 applications statewide with an average assessed value of $17,000 in assessed value. Now, the calculation for tax dollars is fair market value times the level of assessment. Right now, that currently is at 9.5%. So basically, we pay taxes in Wyoming on 9.5% of what our fair market value is. The rest of it, we don't pay taxes on. On that 9.5% assessed value, then you apply the mill levy for whatever taxing entities have the authority to levy a tax where your property is located. That then creates the tax amount. So when we look back at the long-term homeowners exemption, we have a little bit of cleanup that we need to do in that, every bill passes through the legislature standalone. we don't really have a view of how do these all fit together in the end. So we've got a 4% cap. That 4% cap in 2024 was about $300 million in assessed value. That it's not backfilled. Taxing entities did not get that were not able to levy their mills on that. Interestingly enough, if you look at my report from November, you'll find that almost half of that was in Teton County. Now, as we continue to move forward, so now we know we've got the long-term homeowners exemption that will be in 2025. We anticipate by the time we get to that final deadline for applying, which is the fourth Monday in May, we anticipate that we'll have perhaps 25,000 property owners in the state that will qualify for the long-term homeowners. That program has no backfill. County, municipalities, special districts, they won't get the tax dollars. And we'll be able to report to the Revenue Committee exactly what that long-term homeowners exemption meant to taxing entities across the state. We'll be able to do that in June of 2025. Now, how does this bill fit in? So when we look at this bill on page 2, the amount of the exemption is 50% of the fair market value. So we have approximately 230,000 single-family residential properties in Wyoming. So the key here is we're placing that on fair market value, but of course, once you take the fair market value in half, apply that level of assessment, we're really talking about that assessed value. So the key here is trying to determine the legislative intent of this bill. And I really appreciate Chairman Locke reaching out to the Department of Revenue, and we've had this discussion. From a property owner perspective right now, if I currently qualify for the long-term homeowners exemption of 50%, and then if this bill were to pass and it says that I'm entitled to this exemption of 50%, from a property owner perspective, that sounds to me like I'm 100% exempt from property taxes on my residential structure. So the question and the policy choice that this body has is that the intent, or should assessors across the state be applying the 4% cap, calculating a net assessed value, then applying perhaps this 50% to that netted value, and then if that particular property owner also qualifies for the long-term homeowners exemption, should they then apply that exemption to the remainder after this 50%? So and where that calculation is made changes that dollar amount. And so I think it, between this body, the Legislative Service Office, I think we could get some language in statute that starts to make some sense of all these individual pieces of legislation and how the math is supposed to be done. Also keep in mind that last year, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this body also doubled the veterans tax exemption from $3,000 assessed dollars to $6,000 assessed dollars. So once we get through all of this process of doing these percentage calculations, there's still this veterans exemption out there that a veteran might be able to take advantage. We had over 19,000 veterans in Wyoming last year that had the ability to take advantage of the veterans exemption. Now, on to the time period. So this would be for 2 years, 2025 and 2026. There is a consideration that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up. Our computer-assisted mass appraisal system is a massive calculator, right? I mean, it takes every property characteristic from across every structure across the state, every piece of land, and we calculate these values, but it does have some limitations. So what that limitation is that currently, with the system we have today, by applying the 4% cap and by applying a long-term homeowners exemption, right now I can take the net of the 4% cap and apply the long-term homeowners exemption to that net. My problem is I don't have another field within the system to calculate another net. As this bill is written, it would be 50% prior to exempting the 4% cap, which means we're somewhat exempting the same dollar twice. And we just don't have the functionality. Now, what we do have is the ability to apply the 50% long-term homeowners exemption, but then we couldn't apply this 50% exemption. Or if we apply this 50% exemption, then I can't apply the long-term homeowners, not in 2025. Now, we've reached out to our vendor, our computer program vendor. Can they get that done for 2026? They believe they can. And keep in mind, our vendor provides a CAMA system for multiple states across the nation. I can tell you, Wyoming is the only state that has approached property tax relief. And believe me, every state in the nation has looked at inflation and had this bubble that we're trying to deal with. Other states went with one path. The CAMA system was able to accomplish that. With the exemptions that were put in place last year, we were able to accomplish that. It's just adding to that mix that's a challenge right now. So one of the options is, okay, if we apply this 50%, do we stop there? Now, keep in mind, your long-term homeowners is already in statute. Those people are applying for that and anticipating. That exemption has no backfill as well. All the taxing entities will take the hit on the long-term homeowners exemption. Currently in statute, that's a 2-year program as well. There is a bill out there that passed out of Senate revenue yesterday to take away that sunset. So I know this is a lot of moving parts for everybody to follow, but they all have to be applied to that property owner's assessment schedule and their tax bill. So I encourage you all to stop and think about what it's like to stand on the other side of the counter and explain that, because that's the burden that your county assessors, burden isn't the right word. Those are their constituents as well. But it does get confusing to the taxpayer to make sure that they're being treated fairly. The discussion about the reimbursement for all the taxing entities. So we talk about who are those taxing entities. So the only taxing entity that levies on every single assessed dollar statewide is the school foundation, that 12 mills. So for every property in the state, land, structures, everything, the school foundation gets 12 mills. After that, everything is local. Local school districts, local community colleges, local counties, local municipalities. And keep in mind, the municipalities are much more dependent on residential value than some of the other governmental entities. If you'll look at that report that I provided in November, I actually give you the percentage of assessed value for every city and town in the state. That will be a very important piece for you to consider when you're looking at these property tax relief measures. Special districts are only formed when the owners of the property within those districts vote to form and create those special districts and vote to tax themselves. So that's another piece of this puzzle that has to be considered in this overall property tax mix. I wanted to note that on page 4, line 11, should the appropriation not be sufficient to backfill that 50%, it does direct the Department of Revenue to reimburse those entities on a pro rata basis. So what would happen is, we don't know what the total tax collection amount is until mill levies are set the first Monday in August. So for 2025, that tax calendar flows in that the assessment date is January 1, 2025. Assessors have to appraise and get assessment schedules out no later than the fourth Monday in April. Taxpayers have 30 days to appeal that estimated fair market value on their assessment schedule. By the way, all of these exemptions, if the property owner does not feel that they have been granted or denied appropriately, that's another appealable offense that they can go to the County Board of Equalization and have heard. So assessors are going to have to defend every decision they make. After that, then budget time comes for every taxing entity out there. 603 of them, 603 taxing entities that have budget hearing and get input from their property owners within there. Then the mill levies are established no later than the first Monday in August, and tax bills go out the first part of September. That's the first time we know what the overall tax liability is for all of our taxpayers. So it's only after that time that county treasurers can report to the Department of Revenue. This is what the exemption amount, this assessed value multiplied by the mill levies, this is what that costs those entities. And then it's at that time that we would look at the appropriation, determine if it was sufficient. Now, this is a 2-year program, so that's another decision. Do you intend for that total appropriation to be split in half and one amount, or do you intend that we use what we need to that first year, that 2025 reimbursement, and then we look at where we at for 2026, and do we need to consider another appropriation? I mention that because that's exactly what we had to do and what you'll be hearing on the property tax refund program. We've talked about the tax exemptions that are on the front end. What an exemption means is the taxpayer didn't have to pay that tax in the first place. After all of this is said and done, the Wyoming legislature has also funded a property tax refund program for those that meet certain income criteria and they've lived in the state and for a certain amount of time, and they've also occupied that property. So that's another program that you'll see within the Joint Appropriations Committee. We'll see a request for $10.5 million because we've used up the money that we received during the biennium budget, and we need some additional funds to fund the 2024 refunds. We sent out about $14.5 million in that program last year. So we need some more money with that. But that being said, there are items that don't have to be decided immediately, but I just encourage this committee, as you are looking at this bill and the many others that you will have this legislative session related to property tax relief, the things that you really need to consider are, what does it really mean to that taxpayer? How do we explain it to that taxpayer? Is our intent to apply the 4%, net that value, then apply this exemption, net that value, then apply the long-term homeowners exemption after that? Or are we applying all of these exemptions to the fair market value that we established in the first place? Which means we actually are we're exempting the same dollar more than one time at the end for the property owner. So a lot of moving parts. I will stand for any questions at this point. I hope I was able to clarify some of our property tax policy in the state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director. I really appreciate the detailed explanation because it is a complicated issue, and I appreciate that. Any questions? Representative Lane.
Chairman, Director, thank you for coming today. My question has to do with the veterans exemption. If we make this stackable so that you could do your fair market value, your netted, and then your 50%, one or the other, but not both, could the veterans exemption be handled within the CAMA system as well?
Mr. Chairman, yes, ma'am. So what's interesting about the veterans exemption is we're talking about a lot of percentages, but the veterans exemption is a set assessed value, $6,000. So at the end of all of the other calculations, we then would look at what that net assessed value that's still taxable is, apply up to $6,000 for that veteran. Now, keep in mind, let's say it doesn't take the whole $6,000 assessed value. That's about $400 in taxes based on average mill levies. Let's say it only took $3,000 assessed dollars. They've still got $3,000 assessed dollars. That veteran can use that $3,000 assessed dollars on their motor vehicle license plates. So even if tax relief is applied in the form of property taxes on their residence, they still have the ability to use that veterans exemption elsewhere. And they also have the ability to apply for the property tax refund program as well. Thank you for the question.
Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But correct me if I'm wrong, the veterans exemption is already backfilled.
Mr. Chairman, you're not
Thank you.
wrong. It is backfilled. What happens with that, we have a very similar reporting program where the county assessors across the state provide a report to the Department of Revenue no later than September 1st. We calculate statewide what that amount of exemption was. We provide that to the county, or excuse me, the state treasurer's office, and they reimburse county treasurers with that money. So, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Other questions? Representative Worf. I'll work this direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's more of a statement. I obviously wasn't here the last 2 years when a lot of this stuff happened. And I without a doubt, I know that there's been a concerted effort to try to get relief for the people that live in the state. And I understand that. I believe what I'm getting from this is that probably is an interim topic thing. We really need to look at, I think, foundationally, a reformation of how taxes are collected and look at the whole picture at once. And I think that's more something we're going to need to spend time on the interim looking at that. I appreciate you trying to bring us up to speed on kind of what's been done. But that's the one thing, talking specifically to this bill, the fact that we're doing a backfill. I think that's what we need to do to buy us time as a body to be able to provide the relief, but yet assess what that relief is actually doing and to actually restructure. I mean, that's my goal. I believe that's the goal of everybody here, is to try to get all these little pieces that are all over the place to give us temporary relief, but ultimately to come up with a package at the end of the day that's going to be long-term applicability and probably a total reassessment how we do state collection of taxes statewide. So, but with that, Mr. Chairman, I applaud the effort. I think it's great that you worked with the department on this, and that my biggest concern was, what do we do if we run out of the money? But the fact that there's still kind of a provision that allows us to fill that gap and address it, because that's one thing. I obviously don't want to be in a position where my county was at the back of the end and we didn't get our refund where everybody else got theirs. So I want to make sure that all the counties, local governments are taken care of. That was my commitment to my treasurers, that I'm going to try to do no harm while we figure out what we're doing. But I do appreciate your input, and that's what I would really look forward to, is at the end of this session, when the dust is kind of settled, have an opportunity to have you tell us exactly kind of what things we need to be looking at, how we can restructure it and get a final product so that you guys aren't having to bounce all over all these special incentives. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Representative Worf, the one thing that I would say to that is taxes are the process by which we as citizens pool our money to pay for services and infrastructure we can't afford on our own. And what those taxes are, that's the legislature's responsibility in determining, basically what services are, what is government going to provide to our citizens? And then how do we distribute that tax burden? That's the key. And that is a large responsibility for this body. And I recognize that. I would be remiss if I didn't mention M&A. M&A passed the voters this last election. I mentioned our tier system of taxation that was put in place by a constitutional change in the 80s. We went to fair market value, and then we have this level of assessment. And what the legislature has is an opportunity every year. You determine that level of assessment. Now, I will tell you, ever since we went to fair market value, and when I say fair market value, I'm not talking about just residential. We have a basis of fair market value in our Constitution for produced minerals, industrial property. We have, whether it's a house or a retail outlet, everything's valued using that basis. Then we apply the level of assessment. And what the legislature has said is that for mineral production, you're going to pay it 100% of that value. Why? It's only taxed once. When it's severed, you tax it one time. Then we're going to have a tier of industrial. And this legislature has said that's at 11.5%. We're going to exempt everything on your fair market value except for 11.5%, and that's what you're going to pay. Then we have this all other category. This legislature has put that at 9.5%. Those percentages have not changed. Now, the Constitution has been changed to create a different tier that states residential real property. We don't have a definition for residential real property today, and that's the responsibility of the legislature. What do you intend to be residential real? Is it single-family residential? Is it all residential? And when you say all residential, do you mean any structure that can be, that is designed for human habitation, meaning a 36-unit apartment building? Is that residential in your mind? That's a definition that you have to determine. But you've got to determine it so that county assessors across the state know which level of assessment to apply. Because if it's going to be different, if you want income-producing properties, such as multifamily units, to be considered commercial, that's going to fall in the all other. These are all things that are on your plate to determine. And then you've also got the ability, based on that constitutional amendment, to set a different level of assessment for owner-occupied. I mentioned 230,000 residential single-family properties in the state. Of those, about 170,000 are owner-occupied. But we don't know which ones. We will need information from the homeowner to tell us which properties are owner-occupied. So that's an application process. That means county assessors having to communicate with every property owner in the state to determine if that property is owner-occupied. That's another thing for you to consider as you're looking at all of these bills. This particular bill does not require owner-occupied. That's much easier to administer than, God forbid you're the assessor, that property owner did not tell you that it was owner-occupied and it's past the deadline and you can't reduce their tax burden. That is not a good place to be in. So this bill, I believe, addresses that. So I hope that helps with your analysis of property tax as well.
Other questions? Sorry. Representative Campbell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director. So am I to understand this right, with acceptable, the way that this is written right now, we would have people that would be qualified for both of the 50% exemptions. And if we're a veteran, then we could get an extra, we're actually making money off of it, because with that $6,000, am I looking at that correctly?
Mr. Chairman, again, it's going to depend on the math. And that's some clarification that we need. If you want us to apply the 4% caps on the residents, and that's an exemption, then apply this 50% to that netted amount, and then apply, let's say, the long-term homeowners exemption to the netted amount after this 50%. Unfortunately, our CAMA system can't accomplish that for 2025. I have to make that statement right off. Now, if you say that if you qualify for the long-term homeowners exemption, then you can't receive this exemption, we can do that for 2025. Yes, you would be able to apply then for the veterans exemption after all of that. And if you do happen to pay any amount of money, you can also apply for the property tax refund. Remember, the refund program is the only property tax relief that is income-based, and it requires that the maximum refund is your tax bill, whatever you paid, you can get 75% of that back up to the median residential property tax bill in the county where your property is located. And so those are important items. All of the other tax relief that the legislature has passed has nothing related to need-based. And the only one that you have to apply for currently is the long-term homeowners, and then also the veterans exemption. I don't think I said, but we're not sending out checks if we owe you money.
No, I was just looking at that. I thought, there's a revenue stream here. You could actually make money.
I
apologize, Mr. Director.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
there
you.
are days that
Mr.
I
Chairman.
believe that our initials of Department of Revenue really stand for Department of Refund.
I'm sure. Any other questions for the Director? Representative Brown?
Director, I have to ask this. This is a question my constituents continue to ask me. I've heard you say a couple times today what we can afford, what we can afford. And my constituents say, when was the last time that anyone from the state government ever came to me and asked me what I could afford? And this is a problem. This is why we're looking at what we're doing. And one of the problems is the fair market value, rather than using another way of looking at this acquisition value or anything. And I know we're going to get into some of this later. Tell me if you can, when someone moves into a neighborhood and they pay 4 or 5 times what the house is worth because they want the house, how does that affect the neighbors? Does that affect them in the fair market value?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, fair market value is used by all states excluding one. The reason for that is fair market value, just inherent in fair market value, is the inclusion of the consideration of what are interest rates today, because that impacts what someone is willing to pay for a property. Supply and demand impacts the value of a dollar, the buying power of a dollar. The same concept of buying power of a dollar for residences applies to what it costs for governmental entities to provide the services that we expect from government. So when we talk about what can property owners afford, so property tax is a tax based on what the value is of the property that I own. It's been used hundreds of years as a basis. The idea being if I own more property, I'm probably able to pay more in taxes. That may not be the case. So what the Wyoming legislature did is say, you know what? We know that there are folks out there that they're having trouble. And it doesn't matter what age they are. They're having trouble paying those bills. Their income levels are not sufficient to pay those bills. So the legislature put the property tax refund program in place. That is an income base. And I may only need help for 3 years. I may only need help for 5 years. And then once I get on my feet, I'm okay. I don't need that help anymore. So we do have a needs-based program in the state of Wyoming. It's not always funded because also keep in mind, property taxes, not one penny goes to the state of Wyoming. Not a penny. The state general fund does not receive property tax dollars. So I hope that helps with some of your questions, but I would be happy to meet with you individually to talk about this whole concept more.
Thank you, Director. If there's more questions, but everyone, please keep your questions short, quick if we can. I just want to make sure we know time is ticking and there's a lot more people to speak. So thank you.
Thank you. I just want to very quick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director. I just want to clarify, because I want to follow up on what I think Mr. Brown or Representative Brown was going to, was that if we have 4 people that come in from out of state with superior buying power, and they decide, I just moved to Wyoming, I love Wyoming, that house they're selling it for 350, there's 5 bids on it. I'm gonna offer 400, 425. If that happens 4 or 5 times in any different neighborhood, that is going to run the property value of all our neighbors up as well, is it not? And that is part of the problem that we're looking at.
Mr. Chairman, so what properties are selling for definitely impacts fair market value. Your assessor's no different than that fee appraiser that you went in, wanted to refinance or something, and the fee appraiser gives you an estimated value. They're looking at comparable sales. The one thing about it is assessors are doing mass appraisals, so the way the sales are utilized, this is real quick. We start with replacement cost new. What does it take to build that structure using today's labor material costs? Then we depreciate that based on the condition and how old that structure is. That gives us a base value of replacement cost new less depreciation. Add the land to that. Now, how are the sales included? So we have large areas, and we try to include very diverse areas, because what we do is we compare what that property sold for to replacement cost new less depreciation of that percentage and of what that property that sold value is. We calculate a percentage. Did it sell for 8% more than replacement cost new less depreciation? Then we do that for all the properties that you sold in your area. Let's say there were 25 properties that sold in your area. What on average did buyers pay above replacement cost new less depreciation? Then we put that a percentage on there. County assessors then put the same percentage on all the replacement cost new, which means that characteristic information being accurate is key to fairness in that appraisal. And then they have to comply with State Board of Equalization, statutory statistical analysis, which means I take those 25 sales and I array them from the lowest ratio, comparing sale price to the assessor's value, to the highest ratio. Assessors have to fall within 95 to 105% on that statistical analysis. So to say the property across the street sold for $500,000, but that house is twice the size as mine. My house can't possibly be valued because that higher because of that. It isn't. The appraisal does not work that way for a fee appraiser. It does not work that way for the county assessor. But overall, there's definitely an impact there. And in some of your communities across the state, they don't have thousands of sales a year for that analysis. And believe me, the market today, the market on the assessment schedules that you'll see across the state, and you can speak to assessors that are in the crowd, we're in a different place now than we were in 2021, 2022.
In your profession, I apologize. I just want to expedite this but as a follow-up, would you say that that does in fact have bearing, though, that is a factor that we should consider in this?
Mr. Chairman, yes. Assessors don't set the market, they monitor the market using those sales.
Any other questions? Are we okay? Thank you, Director. And I know you'll be here because I know there'll be more questions. So fairly quickly, I'm sorry, this is taking obviously much longer than, well, not more longer than I expected. Just, I knew it was going to take a long time. But please fill the seats. Question, quick one, please go ahead. But I know there was one person who wanted to speak. So Mr. Wynn, if you could speak, and please keep it as quickly as you possibly could. Were there any other kind of individuals or people kind of before some of the organizations wanted to speak? Hopefully, Ms. Huxtable, it's okay if we'll go with you, and then if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and just get Mr. Winnie through the process. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll try to be very brief. Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, currently serving as the legislative chair for the Wyoming County Assessors Association, which we have many of the assessors with us here because we've been having meetings for a couple days. So if you see your assessor and want to take a moment to visit with them, you're welcome to do that. Director Henson did a good job, as she always does, explaining where we're at with some of these situations. A couple of things that I wanted to address on behalf of the assessors. We did talk about this bill in our meeting. It's a tax policy. We typically do not take an action on a tax policy situation. However, I would be remiss if I didn't share their comments. The devastating effect that this could have to some of the smaller counties and the smaller special districts, communities, could be devastating. I know that we acknowledge there's a backfill of 50% of the exempted revenue, but even a 25% reduction to some of these special districts and smaller communities could be devastating. If it's short-term and truly stays short-term, that's one scenario, but we have seen bills where sunsets have been repealed, and so that is just an ongoing concern for us. A couple things in regards to what Director Hinson talked about, that special districts tax themselves, okay? They are elected by the taxpayers and they set their own mill levies. One thing that was not mentioned was bonds. They have the ability to bond, and they have the ability to go above the maximum mill levy when they are repaying a bond. So if the valuation drops, they still have a bond payment to make. That allows them and requires them to increase that mill levy to meet the bond requirement. And so you could see some mill levies increase. Some part of that can be considered shifting of that tax burden to the non-residential people, because the non-residential taxpayers will pay that higher mill levy bond rate as well. I don't know the exact numbers of special districts that have bonds. We can certainly get that for you, but that is a consideration to remember as we're talking about setting mill levies. A second thing, and this comes from the taxpayers that come across my counter, mortgage payments and escrow payments. Escrow companies calculate and do an analysis annually, and when you are going up and down with property tax payments, especially considering that Wyoming's tax payments are made in 2 different years, calendar years, it's a big concern for some of these taxpayers that get notices that their payments are going up, or all of a sudden they have a big refund, and then the next year, oh my gosh, now I gotta pay another $1,000. That's not a reason to kill the bill. I'm just making you aware that taxpayers are becoming cognizant of that and asking questions. I want to reiterate Director Hinson's comment about the order of these exemptions. That is critical for the assessors. We're having a hard time figuring out how it's going to work. There is limited liability for us to go to the taxpayer and make them understand. And she's absolutely correct. They've already heard this. They've already seen some of these bills. The comments are, I'm not going to owe any taxes, or in reference to Representative Campbell's comment, I'm a veteran, I'm going to get it back. They do have the ability to use that veteran exemption on their vehicles, but bear in mind, we're not going to have values set and know all these exemptions till sometime in April. The end of the ability, the calendar year for that veteran exemption ends the 4th Monday in May. If they don't have a vehicle to license between then and May, there is the real possibility that there would be veterans exemption that they could not use. It's a concern for us because we're trying to figure out how we can tell some of those veterans that have lower valued homes. I'm talking about a mobile home scenario, that by the time all these potential exemptions get applied, there'd be very limited tax dollars due. Do we want to reach out to those people that are veterans qualified that we know and say, hey, you may want to think about using some of this on your car? But I really can't do that at this stage yet because we're all still in the moving part stage. And I guess most importantly is just that we get this order and the fact that we cannot do all of these in the system currently. We know we can't for 25. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. And one question, Representative Stibar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding with the vest exemption is you could use it on one or the other. Like if I had a truck and I used my exemption on my truck and got, $90 off, I couldn't go back in and use the rest on my house. It was just one or the other. Is what I've always been told.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stivar, the veterans are granted now a $6,000 assessed value exemption. They can use it on one or the other or both. And I guarantee you in my county, I have taxpayers that do use it on both. They have multiple vehicles they use it on, and then they apply it to the mobile home. So with the increase from 3,000 to 6,000, we could see that potentially more and more. But the calendar for the Veterans Program is the 4th Monday in May to the 4th Monday in May. And so the tax bills don't come out until September, and their notice of assessment comes out in April, so that's a very small window for them to look at that notice of value and say, here's my estimated taxes after all the exemptions have been applied. Oh golly geez, I only have $3,000 worth of assessed value on this notice. I wish I'd have plated my car using my veterans last month. That's the scenario that I'm trying to make you aware of. It's something that we're trying to work with, but they can use that veterans exemption on a vehicle, on real property, or a combination of both. It's just a maximum of $6,000 of assessed value.
Thank you. I'll get offline and talk with my assessor.
There you go.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Any other questions? I'd like to move along if we could, or you okay? Okay. Mr. Winnie, please. And again, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. First, addressing the cascade of exemptions is going to be very important. And all I can say is hang in there because it is that important. I'd like you to not lose sight of the fact that we're talking about people on fixed incomes. We have two things that get to them. First is underlying inflation. As I look back, I retired in 2002. As I look back on the federal cost of living adjustments since 2002, that has doubled the income of people on federal pensions. People on state pensions, at least some of their state pension does not have a cost of living adjustment. So things are rising up underneath them. Then you have the bidding up of values. I've seen quotes on my property out in Sublette County. When I first built it in 2006, the mortgage was $525,000. I've seen quotes from people saying, gee, it's worth $1.2 million now. Wow. I tell you, that's going to be a tough one to handle. Representative Worf talked about infrastructure. This is important. I campaigned last summer in Kemmerer, Opal, Bear River, Rock Springs. There's people in there that are living in single wide and double wides on a permanent foundation that are going to get priced off of their property. And that gets back to Representative Brown's comment about what they can afford. And so my thought for you is don't lose sight of that. And lastly, keep in mind that in the Kemmerer area itself, Kemmerer, people told me, is at the front door that they have problems with water, they have problems with sewer, they have problems with other infrastructure, and there's going to be a bill to pay. That will have a long-term impact as we build that nuclear plant down there and bring in nuclear operators. I mean, it probably a little bit of a stretch in your mind, but reactor safety gets to them being able to have proper housing and proper infrastructure. This is tough nut to crack, subject to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Any questions, sir? So anybody else who wants to speak, please come up, and I'm going to take just a quick moment and talk with the secretary, but please come up, everybody, fill the chairs. Is there any other individual wanting to speak? Okay, please. I'm going to hand over to Chairman here, or my vice, just a second.
Ms. Cove, state your name, who you're with, and go ahead and start.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Erin Taylor. I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. And so just for our new representatives, I wanted to share just briefly representing the 8 community colleges and all of the 56 duly elected trustees across the state. Of course, property tax bills impact the community colleges. Director Henson is such a resource to all of us, and she did such a fantastic job educating the committee throughout the interim, and I would highly recommend that you do check into the materials that she provided, outlining how all of it works, and then how, where all of it goes across the counties. In terms of the community colleges, I just wanted to recognize to you that there are 8 taxing districts. So I'm sure you all, if you have one in your county, you know how that works. You see that on your bill. It's Park, Natrona, Sweetwater, Fremont, Campbell, Goshen, Laramie, and Sheridan. Campbell assesses a lesser amount because they are not taking state aid, but that everyone else assesses 4 mills and then a 5th mill as prescribed by their trustees. When you look at relief given to the residential part of that piece of the pie for the colleges, and I'm sure you're going to hear this for others, that is the most reliable and consistent source of revenue. It doesn't fluctuate, and so that is revenue that the colleges can plan on pretty steadily year over year. And so I just wanted to really emphasize what we did here from Representative Worf, and you heard a little bit from Director Henson. I think it would be wise at this point to see how it all fits together. Recognizing that it's real, believe me, I've been around. When we were looking at all of these issues in 2009, was that the last really big, with lots of property tax bills, it's so important to understand how it all works and understand how it all fits together. So with that, I'm not going to get into how it impacts each and every college. I'm happy to visit with you. I always have a president in the building during the session, and so we'd be happy to visit with you. But I just wanted to share that with you. What it does impact is probably more of an onus on the students. And right now, that's a harder place to be, especially when we're trying to train the workforce across the state. And you hear about that a lot in a lot of your other conversations. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop here. Happy to be part of the conversation and provide any information that you require.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate that. So real quick question, Mr. Remy, before I go ahead. First committee, have some grace. I've already failed on time management, so I was just going to ask everyone if I'm inclined, as long as everybody can, we have a hard stop at 10. So I wanted to put that in place. Is everyone okay with re-adjourn, after adjournment if we reopen the meeting? Because I do want to complete this today, so I'd like to continue after adjournment. Is that acceptable to the people in the room? If there's anyone that's hard to meet, please let me know, or please give me a show of hands, because I at least want to make sure we finish this conversation. I think it's all important. I'm not trying to cut it short, to be honest with you. I would like to make sure we do that. So is that generally acceptable for the people who remain, who would like to speak? Okay with you? And I know Ms. Harstep and potentially others. If that's okay with everyone, and if that's okay with the committee, we're going to re-adjourn, or yeah, we'll come back after adjournment
Mr. Chairman.
of the House floor. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm able to attend this evening or late this afternoon. It depends on adjournment. I would like to attend the oral arguments that are taking place in the Supreme Court room on a case important to my constituents, which starts at 4 o'clock.
That's okay. Don't want to have you miss that. Representative Storer, would you be willing to do
Well, I have a
bill?
lot to say about this bill.
Okay.
Still, as you can imagine.
Okay.
And I think it could value the rest of the committee. I appreciate the interest in speed, but I think as a number of our testifiers this morning have said, there are a lot of moving parts, and we really do need to consider what direction we're going to go at this point in time. And I do think the committee needs to deliberate and understand a little bit better what this bill represents. So, Thursday morning, I'll be here, or Tuesday morning, I guess. We're already on Thursday. And I do think we should really think about what we can do.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
since there is a conflict, may I suggest that we take testimony from Mr. Raymond?
Yeah, let's do that.
And because we can discuss the bill on Thursday. Let's get the testimony from everybody. I don't know if there's anybody online. That's something else you probably need to check. But I think in fairness, to allow the committee to discuss this, let's seek testimony and then let's reconvene.
I don't want to wait for this bill till Tuesday. I think we need to reconvene sooner than that. So Representative Storr, so I would ask for, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to, hopefully adjournment is sooner than that. We can get started quicker than that. I'll find out from the speaker. But on adjournment of the floor, I think I would like to still open that meeting. And then if the members are okay with that, I understand Ms. Storr, or Representative Storr, but we'll work with you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I appreciate the opportunity to go because we are a party to that case that the good representative mentioned, so I do want to be there. Just quickly, it's a pleasure to meet all of you, and I look forward to getting to know each of you more through the coming days and years. I represent the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, so we have 93 county commissioners across the state and 23 counties, as you're well aware. I'm not going to go through the totality of this, but I wanted to just mention one critical key component for why we are interested in this particular legislation, and that is the fact that we appreciate being less reliant on state revenues, not more. And unfortunately, I'm concerned that this bill will force us into some greater reliance on you. I appreciate the conversation today about the dinner table and the conversation that's happening there. It's certainly something that my members hear as well. My members also hear about the desires and needs of residents to receive emergency services, whether that's calling your sheriff's office or having the ambulance show up on time, and they certainly hear about roads. I think that's probably the most pressing thing for many people that call their county commissioners. There are plenty of other things that we could go into, and we will in the years ahead. Do recognize that this bill has a form of backfill in it. Appreciate that. I recognize that this legislation is short-term. However, if we don't make some fundamental changes to this legislation, you've heard some of those today, this will have some serious consequences at the local level. You will see a reduction or elimination of certain services. You will see that there are jobs lost in some jurisdictions if we don't make some changes. I just wanted to give you a couple of examples so that you have it. I'm going to use Washakie County. 42%, I did the calculation this morning, 42% of their funding comes from two sources. One of those is payment in lieu of taxes. That's the federal government paying the county for the fact that there's untaxable federal land in their community. And the second source of that is direct distribution. Why do I bring those two up? Because they're never guaranteed year to year. And as I said, that's 42% of their entire budget. And now we're potentially facing a 25% plus reduction of the property taxes that they receive. So very serious consequences for a county like that. The other example I wanted to give to you is wildfires. There were over 2,000 wildfires in the state of Wyoming last year. 24 of those are fires that counties will receive state aid for or federal aid for. That means 99% of the fires in the state of Wyoming last year were put out by county crews. And many of them are already trying to figure out how do they fill the gas tank of the fire truck to go out there and make sure that they take care of folks. And so this bill will have an impact on them. We need to consider how we ensure that their revenues are there. I'm going to end there, but I wanted to just tell you that I appreciate that this is a start of a conversation. We will be a part of it. We want to be a resource to you. We have been to the legislature for a lot of years and have a lot of data that we can bring to answer your questions, and I'm happy to do that. We want to be part of the solution and look forward to working with you. We'll finalize our positions on the various bills next week when commissioners are here in town, and look forward to getting those to you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ryman, and I am sorry that I ran this out to the end and had the hard stop. Representative Storer is not question for the people who will be speaking and the committee. If we cannot do on adjournment today, can we do on adjournment tomorrow? Would that be, and Secretary, please let me know if that's acceptable.
Yeah, I believe we could. I'll check on meeting room availability, but
Okay.
I don't think that will be a problem.
So I don't know that we can do adjournment today, but if we can do adjournment tomorrow, I'm very sorry to those who would be in attendance. Is that okay with the people who wanted to speak? If there's any concerns, could somebody just let me know? Okay, so we'll probably shoot for adjournment tomorrow to try to make sure we get this through the process and moving forward. And that way we can give it the attention it needs. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's involvement in this process, and I do appreciate your patience with me running it over a little bit. Thank you.